And we are live. I'm George Thomas from the Akron Beacon Journal with Steve Doerschuk from the Canton Repository, Nate Ulrich from the Akron Beacon Journal, looking like Joel Bitonio, and Marla Ridenour from the Akron Beacon Journal. How's it feel, Northeast Ohio? You are in the playoffs for the first time in, 18 years? I don't know where you guys were. 18 years. It was 3 years into my stint at the Beacon Journal, and I was writing about movies. I never expected to be where I am right now. That's for sure.
I was watching it in the airport in Phoenix, waiting for my flight back from the Buckeye Championship game, and standing in line in the boarding line with a lot of other appalled Ohioans that were watching the ending. We didn't want to get on the plane until it was over.
What a day, Marla. But I remember watching the Ohio State game. You know, I've been an Ohio State fan going back to the time immemorial. So at my house, that was such an exciting Buckeyes game that we stayed up all night. Remember getting to Heinz Field, and I was at Heinz Field for the game in 2002 between the Browns and the Steelers in the playoffs. But I remember being really tired because we really wore ourselves out. There was such euphoria at the Ohio State game that you wanted to stay up all night and soak it in, and that's exactly what we did. And I was pretty tired when I got to it's what everybody remembers who wasn't Heinz Field or was just watching on the tube is that the Browns looked tremendous. Bruce Arians and Kelly Holcomb were making beautiful music together. I think they had a couple of different 17-point leads, including one late. And the one play, maybe a signature moment in the expansion era, everyone remembers, is that Holcomb threw one of his best passes of the day. Nice little floater, feathered over Dennis Northcutt on the left sideline, right below the press box. And all Dennis had to do was just look it into his hands. And Browns fans are still celebrating 18 years later instead of waiting for their first trip to the playoffs since then. But that's what I remember.
Okay, wait a second. Back to Marla. I remember a wicked hangover because Nate, what are you laughing at? You couldn't drink that thing.
I did not have the Joel Bitonio beard, but my body looked closer to Joel Bitonio's because I was a senior offensive lineman, and I was much beefier back then. And I was watching it with my friends, and I still can't believe the Browns lost that game. I mean, we thought that they were going to do it. So yeah, I mean, for the Browns to be back all these years later, it's awesome, and of course, it's going to be back in Pittsburgh.
What's that? Well, last week we talked about exercising demons, and it didn't play out the way we thought it would because Mike Tomlin decided to rest a lot of important players this week in playing this game. Now, one demon turned out to be a little more than an elf in that Mason Rudolph and Myles Garrett played nice after the game. They made small talk. They shook hands. But there are still those other demons we discussed with Heinz Field and not really having – I don't think they've ever beat the Steelers there. So in that regard, looking forward, what does this game mean? I mean, the Browns weren't content. The ones we spoke to after the game didn't seem content during those Zoom calls. I think there was a sense of relief more than anything.
Yeah, I'd agree that, they're very excited. They've worked very hard for this. I mean, this is a big deal. It's a great story. I mean, and what we do, we want to write good stories. That's our business. And this is a great story, but the players aren't satisfied. And I think that came across. They have an demons facing Ben Roethlisberger. We talked about last week, 23-2-1 as a starter against the Browns, 24-2-1 if you count when he came off the bench and beat him on one leg that one time some years back. And George, you alluded to this, but they have lost their past 17 games in Pittsburgh. They haven't won them since 2003. So those are a lot of demons exercise that didn't really come into play today.
And you can't play like you played today and exercise any of those. So,
well, here you go. What do you attribute today's play to? I know one thing I noticed immediately. Mason Rudolph and Tomlin went right at Robert Jackson at that corner spot. He was a liability on the field for much of the day, it looked like.
well, you expected them to. Go ahead.
I think to me, the key to today's game in terms of why it was so close, and a key to next week, to a lesser extent, because Mayfield versus Roethlisberger is a lot different than Mayfield versus Rudolph. But today, for the Browns to take care of business the way everyone hoped they would here in Northeast Ohio, was for Mayfield to really convincingly trounce Mason Rudolph in their duel. And that didn't happen. And it didn't happen partly because Rudolph threw some really nice footballs, and that was part of what Myles Garrett told to Rudolph after the game. If you listen to the Myles Garrett interview, it was partly because Baker, for the second straight week, wasn't quite all there. He was more so than he was at New York the previous week. But in my opinion, the Browns are only going to have a chance at Pittsburgh if Baker Mayfield resumes being the best of Baker as we saw him at times this year. There's the Baker with the broken ribs who wasn't any good, and I even wrote something along the lines of at halftime of a game, they should bench him and play Case Keenum until Mayfield heals up. And he caught fire then. He looked really good. He looked like a number one overall pick. Last two games, he hasn't looked like a number one overall pick, but I think he's capable of that, and he better get back to looking like that for them to have a chance at Pittsburgh.
The offense looked out of sync to me today.
I mean, I asked Jarvis if that was because they hadn't practiced, and he really wouldn't heavily stress that. But when you think about, they only had a 1 hour practice and then a more normal one on Friday. I mean, that could be part of it, but he pointed more to the penalties. I mean, Joel Bitonio having problems, he said it was more self-inflicted wounds than the lack of practice time.
Well, that doesn't make sense to me. You iron that stuff out in practice, don't you? Or at this point, is it supposed to be muscle memory or mental things? Are you just sharpening yourself during the week?
Guys, what about the Bill Callahan factor? So let's talk about that. The Bill Callahan factor, and I know when the Browns didn't have their offensive line coach and Mike Pettine's second year of 2015, Andy Moeller was a late scratch in training camp. That just threw a huge wrench in the Browns' 2015 season, and Mike Pettine's chances to stay on beyond 2015. But the Bill Callahan situation today shouldn't be minimized. You don't just take your most important assistant coach out of the mix on the fly and necessarily have smooth sailing.
Yeah, I think these COVID issues are real. I just do. I mean, when you don't have the receivers for the Jets game, and then they don't get to come back to practice until Friday, the only time on the field that they have, with the plan, and then they don't get the Saturday walkthrough. I think it disrupts a lot. The coaches, like you said, Steve, the two offensive line coaches were out today. Passing game coordinator, wide receivers coach, while we're talking about wide receivers, Chad O'Shea was also out today. And then the cornerbacks, I mean, Denzel Ward's the best cornerback by far on the team. Kevin Johnson, the third corner. Terrence Mitchell's the second. So Terrence Mitchell played today, but the Browns are still without two of their three top corners. Turns out Mason Rudolph has a nice deep ball. He had it going today. 3 passes, more than 40 yards, and then 2 other passes. 25 yards, so 5 total, 25 or more. And that was why the Steelers were able to keep it interesting and play it right down to the wire. They would get them in 4th and 10. There was the 28-yard touchdown pass to Chase Claypool. There were some 3rd and longs that he delivered deep balls on. And those chunk plays, I think, are a big result of being down 2 key corners.
Yeah, remember, Nate, I texted you last night after Kevin Johnson was out that Mason was going to throw for 400 and he had 315. So,
Yeah, I did not disagree with you.
yeah. Mhm.
Nate, can I put you on the spot and have you cover Garrett in his post gamer was saying that Pittsburgh, of course, was down some guys today by their choice, but the Browns will have some guys back next week at Pittsburgh because of various factors. But if you don't mind covering the guys so they have a chance to get back who didn't play.
Yeah, I think the only guy they don't have a chance to get back for sure, I think, is Kevin Johnson, because he was a late in the week. If he tested positive, there's some gray area. If he was a close contact, they could get him back. But if he tested positive, no. Denzel kind of like right on the bubble. Kind of depends when the playoff game is and when his positive.
Big bubble, Nate. Big bubble.
Yeah. So I don't think Bill Callahan will be available either, but I think the other coaches will. So, it's going to be a situation where the Browns obviously are going to get some guys back, but not all. And then who knows, with the way things have gone, if they're going to get any more positive cases to pop up between now and then. And the Steelers had to, including Joe Hayden, with COVID today. So it's an ongoing issue, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to monitor. Unfortunately, it was like every day last week. George, are you happy?
Huh?
Are you happy? You got anything else for us?
Am I happy?
Are you satisfied with the video?
I'm never happy. Ever.
You're like the Browns players going to the playoffs.
Huh? What?
The Browns players aren't satisfied either.
Yeah, well, I'm never happy. I'm always grumpy. Just ask my sons.
Does anybody want to talk about one last thing before we go?
What's that?
Kevin Stefanski. I mean, with all the stuff that they've gone through, for them to get to 11 wins, I think he really should be 11 wins and into the playoffs. I think he should be coach of the year. I'm sorry. I mean, you could go a lot of other ways. I mean, Durman in Buffalo. I mean, I think that's one that might get a lot of support. But I think Kevin Stefanski should be the NFL Coach of the Year, considering everything that's gone on here and what he walked into. And yeah, he got a lot of talent, but we know it didn't work out last year.
Nate, let me ask you why you think, and I don't know if I'm being devil's advocate here or actually advocating for Andy Reid, who hasn't won a Coach of the Year recently, and certainly is pretty good at his craft. What would your argument be that hey, it's high time that Andy Reid, who's having another great year, coming up in Super Bowl year, got Coach of the Year for the first time since he's got it way back when he was with the Eagles. But what's your argument for Kevin getting it over Andy Reid?
Well, Andy Reid should have been Coach of the Year by now. So that's not Kevin Stefanski's fault. But Kevin Stefanski, just the fact that he came in here with all the dysfunction that has preceded him, all the losing that's preceded him, and they end the playoff, and the NFL's longest active playoff drought. He deals with all kinds of issues. Every team faces adversity, but they have had a lot of COVID issues. Something we really haven't talked about is two of their best players, certainly their two best defensive players, have missed COVID now, Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward. We know that Odell Beckham Jr. suffered the torn ACL and missed most of the season and won't be back. Nick Chubb, one of their other best players, missed a quarter of the season. They've been through a lot. They've dealt with a lot. And I think
Grady Williams and Delpit. Yeah, you can.
Right, from training camp on. So I just think the way he's righted the ship immediately in his first year is so impressive. So, I'm close to it, and I cover him, although we're on Zoom and we cover him virtually. I know this story intimately. So, maybe if I were in another city covering another coach and knowing X, Y, Z that his team is over, I would. But I just think that Kevin for sure should be one of the guys, a finalist or whatever. He should be strongly in the mix, and I advocate for him to win it.
I can't disagree with anything there. But the thing that's most impressive, of everything he's done, changing the culture. And it seems pretty obvious to me, along with the talent, you change the culture, it begets winning. You see that from last year. I mean, they flipped some of the roster, but the core was still there. And Freddie Kitchens didn't win with it. He comes in, and it was a bit bumpy to start, but I didn't get any hint of any descent through the season. You didn't. Now it's difficult to do over Zoom, obviously, but you never really got a negative vibe from anyone. You know what I mean? And it was all over the place last year.
Yeah, well, I think that's a reflection of Stefanski. I really do. Let's face it, as talented as this team was last year, we know they were immature, they were undisciplined, and I think he came in and he instilled, a business-like approach to these guys, and set a standard. And everybody says they're going to do that, but he followed through with it. And I don't know. I can't say enough about him for him to go 11-5 in his first year as an NFL head coach. I think is remarkable.
And how many times have we said in the past that they didn't look like a professional team? Just the mistakes, the turnovers, the penalties. I mean, just the lack of discipline and the attention to detail. I don't know. I would think that would swing it in his favor. That's just my opinion.
I was starting to say, Marla, that I've gone to 1,000 sports banquets over the years. I can imagine myself at one of those sports banquets where you have a couple of thousand people and they're introducing the guys and the players. Obviously, Mayfield will be introduced and get a huge ovation. Chubb's ovation might be equal to Mayfield's and so on down the line of players. Could you imagine being at a banquet, one of those banquets where you have a couple thousand people, and finally the Toastmaster says, "And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kevin Stefanski," what kind of an ovation Stefanski would get from a room full of Browns fans at this point. So I'm just dovetailing off of your speech there, Nate, on how he's worthy of Coach of the Year. Yeah, sure, he's worthy of Coach of the Year consideration. That's a no-brainer. So, big props to Stefanski, whether he's the winner of that award or not.
Yeah, no doubt. And, just how many times does a new head coach come in here and the people who cover the team every day are like, hang on, so you're going to try to call the plays and be the head coach? Because it has been a disaster so many times. He comes in at age 38 and he's like, yep, I'm one of the cutting-edge, innovative coaches in the NFL, and I'm going to be able to manage it all. By the way, I'm, as George said, changing the culture at the same time, which is, I think, the most important thing. I think the X's and O's are there with Stefanski, but I think that the leadership piece was the big mystery about him, and I think that he has really delivered on that. Funny because I think a lot of times we say, hey, the Browns would be a year ahead of where they are now if they had just listened to Paul DePodesta last year whenever the coaching search was that led to Freddie being hired. They could have hired Stefanski back then instead of the second time around. But what's interesting is Stefanski got that full season of experience of play calling under his belt in Minnesota with Gary Kubiak at his side, and that's the offense that he brought here. So maybe it actually just worked out exactly the way it was supposed to.
Good point.
Okay. We're close to 20 minutes. I have one question. We're gonna leave with this. Steve, how much rubbery chicken did you eat at those sports banquets? Nate Ulrich and Marla Ridenour. Guys, we're done.
See you next week.
George saved his best T-shirt.